I was very much not a fan of the book. I thought that the original book was our modern day equivalent of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I think 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was exploring a whole new world for a lot of people, right? A world under the sea that no one had explored at the time when Jules Verne released it. And so at that time, it was very interesting, very intriguing. But nowadays, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host, Avalon, to review the recent release. That's right, this weekend, we're talking about Project Hail Mary, the 2026 American science fiction adventure film, which was, the screenplay was by Drew Goddard, and it was directed by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. It is also based on the book, Project Hail Mary, by Andy Weir. Now, if you know anything about Andy Weir, you know that his books, have been adapted into films in the past, most notably being that of The Martian. So another space-based film based off of one of his famous books comes to life. Here's a new one, Project Hail Mary, which of course has Ryan Gosling, which we all know and love from previous films, to star as the primary protagonist in this role. So, Avalon, what was your initial impressions and rating for Project Hail Mary?
I'm just going to come out and say it. You should watch this movie. It's worth a watch. Absolutely have not read the book, so I came into this movie blind. Not sure. I mean, I understood some things before the movie, that he's out in space somewhere and he kind of comes across alien life, but that was pretty much it. But I heavily enjoyed the movie. I thought there were some great characters, great stories. The plot is very compelling. At least I found it very compelling. And there are some moments that are absolutely hysterically funny. It marked all the boxes for me. I gave it a 8.5.
Wow. Okay, that is a very high rating in regards to our 9-point rating system, which we use to review films here. So that is a glowing review.
This is the Avalon recommendation. This falls quite cleanly into that.
Yeah, no kidding. I will give a little bit of a contrasting view. I'm very excited to see where this goes, because if anyone has heard me talk about the book, because I read the book a couple months ago, I knew that it was critically acclaimed, and I am sure people will hate me for my thoughts on the book. I was very much not a fan of the book. I thought that the original book was our modern day equivalent of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I think 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was exploring a whole new world for a lot of people, right? A world under the sea that no one had explored at the time when Jules Verne released it. And so at that time, it was very interesting, very intriguing. But nowadays we look at it and I think it's rather boring. This one I thought was the equivalent when I read the book. That being said, I think that the film did surprise me and took a lot of things that I didn't particularly enjoy in the book and cut them out, and focused on some of the primary parts that I thought were actually compelling. So I enjoyed this way more than I thought I would. So there's a lot of kudos to that. And I think there's a couple of reasons which we can get into why that's the case. That being said, I'm not entirely convinced this is the greatest movie ever. So we'll get into my beef with it. But overall, I still enjoyed it a lot. I gave it a 5.9. So that's still a solid rating in my system. And yeah, we'll just get into why that's the case. So if you're curious, keep listening. I think that this, instead of being the modern day 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the film itself is more like our modern day equivalent, a remaking for the modern generation of E.T. With that being said, let's get into it. So if you are unfamiliar with Project Hail Mary, Alan, you want to give the audience a summary before we get started about what Project Hail Mary is all about?
No, it's really funny, but yeah, while I was also writing the review for this movie, I didn't know how to put this, but I got strong flashbacks to the very first movie we reviewed on this podcast, Arrival. In a sense, you got a similar storyline and character arcs, but this one I think is better.
To which film or to which
Arrival.
story? Oh, yeah, and that was actually one of the first films we reviewed on this
Yeah.
podcast. So that's an interesting comparison. That one, yeah, it's very similar in regards to some of the initial arcs you get out of it for sure. And if you're unfamiliar with Arrival, I mean, just go back and review, look at that review. That's like one of the first ones we ever did. But yeah, we'll get into this one and give it its own fair shake. So, what is Project Hail Mary all about?
Project Hail Mary is about the character of Ryland Grace. I forget exactly what his scientific like role. Like he's a teacher when you first see him. He's teaching a science class. He's clearly heavily into science and space. Um, he is more or less brought onto a project. Well, also the movie is told through flashbacks and a modern day. Like he wakes up in space. That's how the movie actually starts. It starts with him in space, waking up with no memory of who he is, how he got there, and what's going on. But he's stuck aboard a spaceship with the rest of the crew dead, and he's trying to figure out. But the only thing he knows is that he's a smart person because he recognizes the equipment around him. He knows what each one is, or at least has some idea of what the equipment is. And then, so in flashbacks, we learn of how he was recruited for this project to save solar system in a way, because there's an astrophage molecule that is killing the sun, more or less, and they need his help to find a way to reverse it, to stop it. And so, like, in the past, we get the story of how they figure out a solution, how they find the star way off, somewhere that's not affected by the astrophage. So they decide to go send a ship there to investigate and send the data back to Earth. And then in the modern day, he's on a spaceship trying to survive and get to this star. And then he encounters an alien life form who doesn't speak the same language as him. It's this little rock spider thing, but it's intelligent. And they're the last, each of them are the last survivors of their ships. So they start to work together because they have the common goal of saving their planets from the astrophage. So the movie takes off from there, telling their story, while at the same time we get the past of like, how did Ryland Grace end up on the spaceship, the Hail Mary? So.
Yep, that's the basics of the film for sure. And you get to introduce to three of the primary characters. Ryan Gosling's character, which is Ryland Grace. You get introduced to this alien character known as Rocky, and then you get introduced to another character known as Eva Strautt, and she's the leader of the project known as Project Hail Mary, which is the titular name for the film. So let's get into it. You get introduced, like you said, right off the bat to this person who wakes up on this spaceship. He doesn't know what's going on. He finds that his compatriots are all dead, and he can't remember why he's there or what happened. He has a lapse in memory. And then he slowly starts to piece it together as his memory slowly returns, and he carries off to this planet, Tau City, as he sees that there is a surviving sun, in the midst of all of the other suns that are out there or stars that are out there that are being consumed by the astrophage, which is this alien life form. What are your thoughts on the protagonist to this film?
I think Ryland Grace is a complex, interesting character because when he's first in the past brought into this project, he's doing it because he's trying to prove his theory right that he was shamed for in the past. Like he was said he was wrong, and then he's given an opportunity to prove himself right by being part of this project. Except he inadvertently proves himself wrong yet again, but then gets brought into this whole like he realizes the Earth is in danger, and so he more or less feels compelled to at least help out with this project at that point. Though he's kind of considers himself a fearful, like he's kind of afraid. He's not really a strong, like stand up for yourself kind of person. So, and I don't know if we want to go into plot twists or like spoilers yet, but
Sure. I mean, everyone should acknowledge from the start that we do go over what happens in the film to a very solid degree. There will be spoilers, as there always is.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you feel it's relevant at this point, it's fair to bring up.
Well, I mean, as far as his character, I just was going to point out, like, he is like this fearful, like, he doesn't want to put himself in danger. He doesn't want to die alone. Doesn't want to die in space. He wants to stay on Earth. That's his whole like motive and drive. He wants to keep living. And he sees going to space as a death sentence and as a suicide. He recognizes it as suicide in a way, and he doesn't want to be like, when it's brought up that he should go on the spaceship, the Hail Mary, he rejects it. And in the end, he is drugged and forcibly put onto the spaceship, induced into a coma state. And so he's not even there of his own free will, and he doesn't even realize that till much later on in the movie when his memories come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, his character is like, he is a character who struggles with fear, with isolation. He doesn't want to be alone. He doesn't want to be in space. He wants to go back to where life is. So his whole struggle is understandable and relatable in many ways. And I really liked his character, especially how he has to struggle with what he goes through. And his whole relationship with Rocky it's hilarious. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, from the start, they play him off as a very fun-loving character. I mean, he interacts with kids, so you see that he has some level of a playful attitude with the kids from the start. Mm-hmm. And then even with his initial interactions on the ship, you see that it's more of he's trying to make the best out of the situation and having fun with it in his own way, right? It was one of the few things that I recalled being different in the book than in the film, which I think I liked. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. So it's probably relevant to get at that from the start. And that is you look at, I mean, this film has, let me talk about the book first. The book has it has a fun-loving aspect to it for sure. But I think most of that comes in as the film or the book progresses, and it starts off with a very almost concerning start where you go, what's going on? He can't remember everything. It's more of oh my goodness, I'm trapped in space, what's going on? And this one has a lot more of a fun aspect to it, where you see it plays it off in a very playful attitude as he realizes, his coworkers are dead. What on earth? What happened? And in the book, I thought I got a lot more gravitas to that initial setting. I think that's intentional in the film, and I actually kind of enjoy it for a couple of aspects. One, it sets the tone for the film. It lets you know that this is going to have a fun-loving aspect from the start. And I also think that it also maybe plays off the character in a positive way that makes him relatable and enjoyable to view as a character. I was really surprised that they took this aspect immediately, and I was curious why until I looked at who had created this film. So if you look at the combo here, I actually think it's a really great combo in regards to the screenplay writer and the directors. I don't know if you're familiar with Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, but they've done a lot of great films that have been given accolades, at least in regards to the enjoyability of what they've created. We haven't reviewed many of them here, except for the Spider-Verse films, which we have reviewed, but they've also done things such as the Lego movies. They've done the Lego Batman movies. They did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatball. They did Cocaine Bear. They've done a lot of these films that have some sort of almost like tongue-in-cheek aspect to them, which is pretty fun. And so they brought that into this film as the directors. At the same time, you had the contrast with Drew Goddard as the screenplay writer. And Drew Goddard is known for things such as The Cabin in the Woods. He wrote the Martian screenplay as well, and World War Z and Cloverfield. So these are all films that maybe have a more intense kind of feel, and you got a somewhat of a combo here where you had the intensity aspect of it brought in at certain parts, and you also had the fun-loving, enjoyable aspect brought in at other parts. And so it was interesting to see how the directors, I should say, and the screenplay writer were brought together to create a fairly dynamic film in regards to both of those aspects playing against each other. Because you get the impression that there is a serious tone to this film at times, but you also still get the fun-loving jaunt through space, which is what this film definitely plays to, especially in the commercials. I think someone who's coming from it from the outside wouldn't be surprised that it had that fun-loving aspect to it. But it definitely played into how they interpreted it, and I thought that they did very well. So that's from the start. That's what they do with this character. I mean, Gosling's amazing. We're just going to say that off the bat. He's a great actor, and he does really well in this one, to be sure. No doubt about that. Yeah, I mean, as in regards to a character, he's very enjoyable. I think his flaws are real-ish. And this is all right. I'm gonna get right into like my thoughts right off the bat. Why not? Right. So I think the character has real flaws. I think my concern is like this contrast between the space universe, if you will, where he's currently on this adventure, and the historical universe where he's on Earth, if you want to provide that contrast, right? His history versus his current present self. And there isn't like there's no connection there, because clearly it's the same character and clearly he has concerns about being in space. But there's also a lot more of a resignation to where he's at in space and he's just trying to figure it out, versus there's an aspect of him on Earth where he's trying to get out of it. I think that
Well,
it's not necessarily, and I still struggle with how to interpret this, or even to say how would you do it better. But I think that like I don't get the impression that a lot of his struggles as a human materialize in any like tangible actions, except for at the end when he's in space. And I know that's getting way into the weeds right at the start, so I don't want to maybe to provide just a little bit of a background here for what we're talking about, right? He, like Avalon said at the beginning, when he's on Earth, he doesn't really want to go out into space. He wants to figure out what's going on with the astrophage and help the scientists out, but then that's pretty much his only relegated role, right? And then at a certain point in the film, you realize he had to go onto the spaceship because he's on the spaceship in the middle of the story. So why did that happen? And then you find out that he was forced to, and he didn't really want to. But most of the film, he's already in space and he's trying to figure it out. And so his misgivings and his fear doesn't really show up in space as much as he just realizes, okay, I'm here, I need to figure it out. And he's resigned himself to that fate.
I would make 2 points. First off, this movie, when you realize it, I mean, the story's non-linear in some ways, where it's like you have the flashback story as well as the present day story in space, and you have to realize, I mean, even though they are told linearly, the reality is that whole flashback sequence takes place in the past. Furthermore, his present day version doesn't remember most of what happened in the past. Of course, getting it more or less in real time as he's getting it in those specific moments. So he doesn't even fully realize why he's on the ship or how he's on the ship until later on in the story. And so for him, like, yeah, he's resigned because he doesn't know why he's here. He doesn't know how he's here. He's also the only guy here. And it's just like he is trying to figure it out. And but he definitely has these moments where he's like, yeah, I don't want to be here. He doesn't want to do, like, I just think of the scene where he pokes his head out of the spaceship, sees space, and he's like, nope. And he tries to go back in, and then his thing malfunctions. He gets flung back out into space. So, like, I see things like that as continuations of that little flaw, like of that scenario still playing forward, though we don't fully realize, like, that we don't fully realize it. I guess we're still learning about his character and such.
Sure. And I guess like I want, maybe the best way to go about this is to go through it somewhat linearly as they do in the film, to address, maybe develop more where I'm coming from this, because there is some degree of his quirkiness being manifest in space in regards to his concerns. In regards to, let's just say, what maybe my concerns are in regards to how the film is developed, is this idea of how are we engaging the audience in a way that gets them unsure of the outcome of this film. Like, will he end up successfully making it back to Earth and saving everyone from the astrophage? I think once you get to the point where you understand who Rocky is as the alien creature that he comes into contact with, you don't necessarily have as much concern that he will get back to Earth. You might disagree. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that at that point in the movie, Ryland Grace doesn't he doesn't assume he's going back to Earth. He's assuming he's going to die in space at that point. Um, Shoot, could you repeat the question again? I'm trying to.
Sure. Well, so you see this character of Ryland Grace, and he has the one scene, if you will, where he says, "I more or less have resigned myself to this," and then Rocky, which we'll get to the alien in a minute,
okay, yeah.
but Rocky ends up saying, "Oh, well, I can give you the materials to get back home." And his whole mission in this entire thing is to save Earth, right? To get some sort of solution to stop the astrophage from eating the sun and cooling the Earth to the degree that no one can no longer inhabit Earth. That's generally like the flow of the film is, will Ryland Grace find the solution and save Earth from the astrophage? And I guess there's a sub question of, will he end up making it out alive or not? My general impression is there is like 2 points of inflection in the entire film where there's doubt brought to that. And or I guess you could maybe say 3. And the first one is when he meets Rocky. And I think Rocky is what throws a real big wrench into how you might expect this film to go. Because you look at this character of Rocky, this alien just coming up, and you're like, well, where did the alien come from? Why are they there? What are they going to do? Are they a friend or are they an enemy, right? And this is the classic alien question. When you come into contact with an extraterrestrial species, will they be someone who wants to kill you, or will they be someone who's your ally? And then once you come to the conclusion that Rocky's not there to kill him, he's more or less another astronaut from another planet bumbling about trying to figure it out, just like Ryland Grace is. Once you come to that conclusion, I think you get the conclusion that the rest of the film is going to resolve what the question of the film is pretty succinctly.
I disagree, because there was never an assumption on my part that they were going to succeed in stopping the astrophage. In fact, you don't even realize what the cure is for stopping the astrophage until they realize the life on Adrian, that planet, is like the antagonist or the predator of the astrophage. It's not until that moment that you realize there is a way to stop the astrophage. In fact, up till that moment, they're still, because up to that point in the movie, sure, they're like bumbling around trying to communicate, trying to learn and trying to get to their goal, but there's not like, they don't really make any headway on the problem with Earth. I mean, sure, it's a lighthearted sequence because it's like and it is intentionally comedic, where it's like, oh, there's like, it's all the issues with language learning and communication, what goes wrong, and like cultures colliding. Like, it's all that fun stuff in conflict and comedy and chaos. So it's, of course, it's lighthearted, and maybe it's a break from the overarching conflict and motive for going into space, but that isn't fully left at the door. I mean, and when they do come back to it eventually, and even when they find out they need the organisms on the planet Adrian, do they, like, the whole process is complicated enough, and it's like, there is questions: can they succeed? Can they get back up? I would say that the movie does enough to keep the tension going, because you're not sure. I actually wasn't sure if they're going to succeed or not. I haven't read the book, by the way, so I had no idea. Is Ryland Grace going to die? Is he going to die here or not? Is Rocky going to die here? And like, there was a moment in the movie where I thought one or both, like, at least Rocky may have died in that one scene. Like, I had no idea. Like, I was watching, like, is he going to find out what's going to happen here? Just like, that was my legitimate impression of when I was watching the movie. So
yeah, and I think that it's like, in regards to, so just to backtrack just a bit before you get to the idea of him meeting Rocky, I believe they introduce the scientific aspect to it, where they're trying to figure out what astrophage is and what it can do and how to replicate it and all these other things, right? And you see some level of that on Earth, where you see the character of Ryland Grace, and he's working with some of the other characters from Earth, and he basically comes to the conclusion of how this is figured out, right? They go through some science mumbo jumbo, if you will, which they go into a lot more in the books. And they figure out, okay, this is how we replicate it. This is how it's a fuel source. And they start to use it, even though it's their enemy, to launch themselves out into space. And so, sure, they do not have a solution yet. But the elements they put into place early on in the film is that even though some level of Ryland Grace is a bumbling, funny guy, he's able to figure things out, right? He's not an idiot. He's smart, and he has some level of wherewithal to do the science stuff that we as the non-scientific audience don't know, and he can figure these things out. And so I think that when you set up those expectations, the reasonable conclusion that you draw from that is that he will be able to figure out some sort of solution throughout the rest of the film, right? And then the question is, like, if that's the goal of the film, and he has the wherewithal to do that, it is then like the impetus of the film to provide the doubt in our minds that he will accomplish that. I think that there's 3 inflection points as to whether or not he will achieve that throughout the film. And the first one is when Rocky shows up, because you don't know. Rocky's like a wild card when he first shows up. You don't know what he's going to do. But once he's established as another good guy who's there to help him, once again, I think you're on track to believe that he's going to accomplish that. I think the second time when that appears is when they end up trying to harvest the astrophage, not enemy, but parasite, if you will, that will eat the astrophage, and they start to crash into the planet. That's another point where you go, oh, shoot, they might actually die. So I think that point, and I think that scene actually is not only is good, but is better than it is in the book. So there's a couple scenes, there's like 2 scenes, I would say, in the entire film where you think that, where I thought, both reading the book and watching the movie, that he might not succeed at doing the science stuff that we know he's capable of doing to accomplish the story goal. Other than that, I thought he was going to accomplish it.
I guess in my mind, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because we didn't have an answer. Because I think just assuming, because you can do that in any movie and story, really, where like you just assume the hero is going to win or like going to succeed. Until you're actually given the solution in front of you, it's easy to like, oh, they're just going to win because they're the main character, they're the hero. Because you could do that with any story, really. And then if you take that mindset, it's like you could apply it to anything. So, I mean, in my mind, like I would like to give characters the benefit of the doubt, because until they at least show the solution, or at least show us like, because for good like part of the movie, we're only shown the planet, or we're only shown that the one star is not affected by the astrophage. We're not sure why. So we assume we know the solution is there somehow, but we don't know what it is. And I mean, the reality is it could have been something even worse. It could be something good. It could be something bad. It could have been something that would have killed Earth. I mean, you don't know. I mean, you could speculate before that moment, but until like we get to the planet, only when we get to the planet do we realize, oh, it's a predator for the astrophage.
Sure. We don't have the technical tool, if you will, to come to that conclusion. I mean, I would say at this point, this is just a point that we are going to disagree on. I think it's just natural pattern recognition for us to assume that something's going to go about a certain way. And like audiences will do that in general, unless you give them a reason to believe otherwise. And I just think other than those 2 scenes, you don't have a reason to believe otherwise that he won't succeed at the story goal. So, and I think that's one of the reasons that films that do subvert that, or stories that subvert that well, are well acclaimed. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, and this is not a 1-to-1 comparison, but for example, Game of Thrones, one of the reasons that it is well acclaimed is because George R.R. Martin did very well at setting up, this is where everyone's going. We see that the Starks are going to try to take the Iron Throne, or at least to reject the Iron Throne and be their own people. And then there's constantly obstacles thrown in their way to the point where people are dying that are critical to achieving that goal. And that makes you doubt, will they actually be able to do that when the entire family is dying left and right? So I think that in my mind, the assumption is not unreasonable to assume that once you set some level of expectation there, that they can achieve that. But I mean, obviously, if you want to take the more benevolent stance, I guess, if you will, that they need to prove the technical aspect of it, then yeah, you're going to come to the conclusion that that they might not achieve the story goal. So do you disagree? Do you agree? Leave it in the comments. We don't want to get too caught up in those details, but I think it's fair to say that we should probably move on. What were your thoughts on that scene where they are fishing, more or less, for the astrophage parasite?
it's a very tense scene where everything in a way has to go right, and it's clear even from the get-go there are little things that don't seem to be like, even like when they're training for it, Rocky criticizes Ryland Grace's piloting skills. Like, so like they don't have a good start, and then they actually get down there, drop the fishing line more or less, and then they have to bring it back up. And of course, Ryland Grace almost falls off the spaceship. He almost gets pulled off the spaceship on top of that, and he almost loses the sample, the fishing line. I forget what they called it. They gave it a name, and I'm forgetting what it is. But
The Taumoeba?
no,
Or you're talking about the little device they used to
the
fish.
device they used. They gave it a name, I think, but I can't remember what it was. But yeah, no, like the whole scene is tense, and then they have to actually fly out of the atmosphere of the planet because they're about to crash, and due to the pressure and everything, Riley Grace gets his head knocked pretty bad. He can't hit the final switches, forcing Rocky to break out of his containment so it help him. And Rocky's dying now, like exposed to the air that he can't survive in. Like the whole sequence is very, like, from start to finish, it's very well done, very intense, with like little moments of humor spread here and there that fit the characters and situation. But it's like, it does like raise questions as the ending. What's going to be the final result of this?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think at that point, I know someone has asked a question about the linearity of the storyline. We'll get to that in just a minute, but Rocky's a big part of this element of that scene, and yeah, it's a very tense one. There's a lot of obstacles between these two characters interacting because they have to live in different environments. There's one that's very hot that Rocky lives in compared to Ryland Grace, who's a human, and they can't interact in that same way. There's a language barrier that they end up having to figure out and overcome. There's multiple different aspects where even though they're side by side, they're trying to work together, they can't shake hands, right? One has to be in a little crystalline ball, whereas the other one can walk around in a air-controlled environment in his spacecraft. So they're having to interact with these dynamics, and this scene throws that into question, where Ryland Grace ends up getting a concussion and he's barely cognizant. And then in that moment, Rocky makes the decision as this alien species to break out of his shell and to save the day, but at the cost of himself getting very hurt. And in that whole process, you get this idea that Rocky is devastated, right? He's hurt and you don't know if he's going to survive. And while Ryland Grace ends up recuperating to some degree and he's trying to find a solution, did you find, I guess, like, let's just talk about Rocky. What are your thoughts on him as a character? Because it looks like in this moment that he's dead, and Ryland Grace is going to have to continue without him. Obviously, he's a fun-loving little alien. Did you think he was a compelling aspect of the film?
Oh yes, even though you, I mean, he's kind of like, feels like the smarter of the two at certain points in the movie, where it's like, great. I mean, they have their moments of communication malfunction where Rocky's clearly getting annoyed with Grace for not understanding what he's trying to communicate. But at the same time, he like Rocky, Rocky, like Grace, appreciates life. He has his own like fun, like appreciating moments like Grace does, and he likes to explore, see new things. I really liked Rocky's character. They managed to miming and robotic voice to make him a compelling character for me. So
yeah, and I will say that Rocky,
to answer your question, when Rocky is in the thing, I actually felt something. I was like, oh shoot, is he dead now? Like, legitimately.
And they draw that out more than they do in the book, and I think that was a good add, right? This big question about, did Rocky survive this? It lingers there for a solid moment longer than it does in the book, and I think it leads to us having some concern about the consequences of this situation. Do I think that he should have died, or like, would that have added more intensity to the film? Maybe. I mean, I'm not going to throw too much shade onto that because there's like a star-studded cast of 3 people, if you really want to talk about the serious characters in this film. So yeah, I'm not going to throw too much shade at that. Maybe it would have added extra tension to it, but they utilize it fairly well. And in regards to Rocky as a character compared to the books, spot on. Like many ways they created him is exactly how I imagined him in the book. Very fun-loving little creature. He's more of the mechanic compared to Ryland Grace's scientist aspect, and so they mesh together, doing different roles very well. And they both get technical in their own ways and help each other out and provide this synthesis in finding a solution to this. Yeah, he's a great character. The only thing that I saw them change in regards to how he is as a character compared to the book was the way he eats. And you might not even remember that because it's a side bit, but it is an embarrassing thing for Rocky in the books to eat in front of anyone. Like it's more or less our comparison of going to the bathroom for them, where they, we don't poop in front of other people. That's weird and that's embarrassing. But for Rocky's character, it's embarrassing to eat in front of someone else in the books. In this one, he just takes a bunch of goo and shoves it up his mouth, and it looks absolutely nasty, but they use it as a comedic piece of relief in the film. So, that was literally the only thing that I saw that was different compared to the books. So they were very true to the books. I thought it was, I didn't have any beefs with him. He was very enjoyable. I think that he adds a lot to the film, especially in regards to the beginning when you're unsure about what's going on. It adds tension there. And then in regards to adding a playful dynamic that they were intentionally creating for this film, they did that very well. But yeah, and then that scene, like I said, was fairly good. In regards to the entire film, it's probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire film. So once again, done very accurately. I don't have a lot of problems with that. Before we get too far along, I think it's fair to address one of the questions we got where the audience right now is asking about the linearity of the film. There's a aspect of it where it's not a linear progression. You have a lot of flashbacks, which are a huge part of it. And there's some indications that the flashbacks are correlating with the memory returning to Grace as he's on the spaceship and he starts to remember what happened to him, which brought him to this moment. Do you think that it would have been better to tell it in a linear fashion, or do you think that it is good the way they told it?
I mean, even if you told it linearly, he still lost his memory, and then it becomes a question of, and how would you show his memory returning, kind of thing, I guess? Like, would you have a repeat of those scenes? Would you show, like, images or something? I just would wonder how you would show his memory returning. Whereas if you do this flashback sequence, it makes more sense to me, because if it's told, if those flashbacks happen as he's remembering them, then it makes sense why he acts the way he does in some cases throughout the movie. It explains why, okay, like he starts to get a handle of why he's out there, what's going on, even if he doesn't remember that he didn't actually sign up for the mission until like the mission's practically over at that point. Because he gets that memory when he's like on Rocky's ship, essentially, right, when he's like getting to visit it. At that point, the mission is pretty much done. So, I mean, it's just a slight thing for him to realize, oh, I didn't actually want to be here in the first place. But
yeah.
And I think in that case, I just think the way they told it is probably the best way they could have told it. I mean, because then you as the audience get the same revelations that Ryland Grace does. And while I haven't read the book, I did read something about the book being told in first person. And obviously, the thing about the first person is you get access to the main character's thoughts all the time. Like, you get to hear what they're thinking, what conversations they have with themselves. You don't get that in the movie because it's a visual medium. So, I mean, in a way, the flashback sequence is probably the best way to harken back to that first person's perspective for the audience, so they get that information at the same time as the main character does. So, I personally, that's my thoughts. So
yeah, and I would say that in regards to telling the story in a linear fashion, if you were to do that, it would be a very different story, both in regards to how you would perceive the film, and also I think in regards to how you would need to compellingly escalate some of the stakes. And I'll get to my one beef in a minute. But in regards to the the way that you would more or less need to tell a story is now that you know that everything's happened the way that it does, the question is like, what is the impact of not remembering these things? And you almost need more mistakes being made if you already know what's happened, but now he as the main character has forgotten. And so that would need to be a new dynamic, or something similar to that would need to be a new dynamic to add a more linear fashion to it. And that would inherently change your perception of what's going on in the story. I don't know that it would change it too much, but it would definitely need to be changed to accommodate that perspective. So I think that for now, my general impression is it's fine the way it was. The only real beef you might get in regards to it is well, this is my one beef with how they get to it, and this is where you get the revelation at the near the end of the film, which you just mentioned, and that is that he didn't actually want to go on this mission. He rejected the call to go on the mission, and then Eva Straught ends up forcing him to by drugging him and putting him on the ship. And well, let me just get your thoughts on it before I just talk all the time. What are your thoughts on that revelation?
I mean, one thing, it shows us more about. I mean, it really just shows how far Grace was, like, in his fear and like not wanting, like, his cowardice in a way where it's like he didn't actually want to be on this mission. He doesn't want, like, he makes that abundantly clear earlier on in the movie. But it's like, even when he's presented with the like annihilation of the human race and like his very students, he's like claiming he wants to help, like, teach and like help, and like he's given all the reasons why he should go, and he still says no. Like, it just kind of shows not only his cowardice but his like selfishness and self-centeredness in some ways, where it's like, I can't do this, I don't want to do this. Uh and in a way you see that you see some of the other characters around him who are part of the program, like, they don't actually want to force him to do this, but they also are running out of time. Like, they're in a position now, they need someone who knows the program well enough, like he does, to be on the ship, and they lost the one other guy, the other people they needed to be like in the science role. So it's like, it's literally him or nothing, or wait far longer and then more people die. So
Right. Yeah, that's the stance that Eva Straught takes, and this is how she comes to the conclusion that she must force Ryan Gosling's character of Grace to go on this mission. I think that it makes sense in regards to a motive. Straught's character clearly has reason for doing this. Grace's character clearly has reasons for not wanting to do it, even though his reasons are purely out of self-interest and cowardice rather than a benevolent opinion. And so she takes the hard stance of forcing him to do that. I think and I know you're not going to like this, but you know what? I just got to say my piece. In regards to revelations, it's just not a revelation that has any impact on the story, in my opinion. What you get is you get this character who's like, you get this revelation of, oh shoot, he was forced to, he didn't want to. Okay, how does that impact him in any way? Well, he doesn't even acknowledge it. Even in his messages back to her at the end of the film, it's more or less oh, it was nice knowing you. Here's a little trinket from my adventures out in space, yada, yada. And so the idea that there was some sort of anger with her or any way that impacts how he interacts with the story going forward, there is none. And so in regards to a revelation, we talked about this as a comparison with the Dune films, right? Which, if you all know, I'm a fan of the Dune films, so this is no shade on the Dune films per se, but the Dune films have this revelation that the main character is actually related to the villain as I believe it's his grandfather in the films. And that's like, well, wow, his grandfather's the villain. And you go, oh, shoot, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything. He doesn't change how he acts in any way. He continues to fulfill the goal that he had planned to fulfill from the start. And so this film had the same problem, where you get this revelation that, oh, it's this character. He didn't want to go on this mission. Oh, shoot, what is he going to do because of that? Well, he's not going to do anything different. He just now knows this extra information. Ah, darn. Like, it doesn't actually impact the film in a tangible way. And so is it necessary for the sake of, and I guess like the reason I harp on it a little bit is because it was presented in a way that it felt like it was supposed to be this big impactful thing that they just revealed to us, and it didn't really change anything. So it felt, and maybe I'm taking a too hard line of a stance, but I felt a little cheated.
I would say, well, I think the other aspect of this movie is that even though it has this plot going, the heart, if you could say the living heart of the movie, like the thing that draws people to it, is the characters and the character study, is the characters of Grace and Rocky in a way. Like they're the two character so the more we learn of Grace, the more we understand him as a character, the more we understand why he does what he does and what brought him down the spaceship to begin with. Because I think it is the unanswered question at the beginning of the movie. He doesn't remember, how did he get on the spaceship? Why is he the only one alive? There's some things like that. You question that as the audience, and that scene in a way is an answer to some of those questions. Okay, this is how he got on the spaceship, and even though we're showing in a flashback, he was one of the original scientists scheduled to be on this ship. So that scene functions as a revelation in terms of how he got on the spaceship. Why is he on the spaceship? And it kind of reveals more of Grace's character, just showing more of who he is to us.
Right.
But in terms of story, you're right. It doesn't. In terms of the plot of the story, it has no bearing on the plot. It is almost it doesn't affect whether they get the astrophage or not. It doesn't impact whether they come back to Earth or not. It doesn't impact any of those things.
Sure.
I think the scene still has its purpose in terms of the story and characters, but in terms of the that overarching plot, no, it doesn't have it doesn't serve a purpose in that regard. So
yeah, and in my mind, I chalk this up to one of many things where it is a big question mark in the film. It's a mystery among many mysteries. The first mystery being why he's there gets answered then. Other mysteries around interacting with aliens, are they good or are they bad, gets answered earlier. How do you stop the astrophage, gets answered at different points. So there's a lot of question marks throughout this film that are getting checked off throughout different points in the film. So there's a lot of, I guess the thing that I come to the conclusion of is based off of this and earlier scenes, is that a lot of the tension in this film, or the curiosity around watching this film, comes from the questions that it poses of why is he here? Who is this alien? How are they going to stop this threat? And so it is the mystery around it that runs it from the start. Put a pin in that, because I think I have some thoughts on that for the end of this, but we'll get to that because I don't want to get too drawn away from that. I do want to address briefly what one of the audiences asked about the Iridian language and the deconstruction of that. There are many aspects of this film that were brushed over briefly to get us through the plot, right? And so there's a lot of intricate details into analyzing how these things occur in the book. The ideas around how the astrophage works, about how the Taumoeba work, about how the interactions between Rocky and Grace work. There's a lot of intricacies that are fully explained in the book. I know that some people really like that. I mean, it's a very Brandon Sanderson-esque idea to just go through all the details of how everything works to the full degree, right? And they do that in this book. The idea that they streamlined it, in my opinion, was a very good move, just because they take it and they make it a lot more accessible, especially in regards to the science. Sometimes it gets a little weird when you get to things such as for example, when they find out that the Taumoeba, which eat the astrophage, are actually escaping the capsules that they have in the ship and are starting to get out and eat the other astrophage and threatening to blow up the ship that people are on, since they use the astrophage as fuel. It's oh no, that's not a good thing. We don't want that. That area was more or less summed up in the film in one line, where they say, oh, because of xenonite, they had metabolized it in some way to that it could adapt to xenonite, and now it evolved. There was a single line like that explain that whole thing away. And if you think for a second, you might go, well, that's kind of weird. That doesn't feel like a full explanation. But for the sake of moving along the plot, not getting too caught up in the science, they did things like that. Didn't get too caught up in that. And in regards to the Iridian language, that's probably the aspect of the film that's explained the most in the film and in the book as a 1-to-1 ratio, if you will. It's more close than most other aspects of the science in the book. So I think that you get a pretty solid idea of how they did things in regards to understanding each other's languages in the film, and they do it through this idea. I assume everyone got the conclusion that that Rocky was using sound waves to map out areas and to more or less feel things or see things in the same way that we as humans do, which was a very interesting idea, interesting concept to use as an interactive form. I liked it, and I didn't have any problem with it. But if you didn't see that, that's yes, more or less.
Is that what it says in the books?
It's so it's feel, more or less. So vibrations. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah, because there's a scene where he actually sees Grace outside standing on the ship itself.
Yeah, I did think about that. I was like, I don't know how you do that.
If that's how he sees, like, if it's sound waves, that doesn't make any sense because you would not hear anything from there. But
yeah, I think they might have had an explanation from that in the book. It's been a couple months, so I don't remember that scene exactly how that worked. But I do recall him trying to line up the ship to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how that worked out in the book. You'd have to read it yourself. So, if you're intrigued, go ahead and give it a look. I'm not going to swear by that on the podcast because, yeah, like I said, anyways. Don't want to get too caught up in that. I want to bring it back to that discussion we were just having in regards to this revelation with the main character, Grace, and realizing that he, in the past, actually didn't want to go on this mission and was forced to. And this all was brought about by this character of Eva Strautt, and she was forcing him to do this. What are your thoughts on her as a character in this film?
In terms of her character, I have mixed feelings. I think she does her role service enough. I mean, she's kind of a standoffish kind of character to begin with. I mean, she looks like even when they're having like the party, she's off by herself pretty much. Mm-hmm. She does sing like part of a song and then leaves. So like, you get the idea that she doesn't like to goof off as much. She's very strict, down to business kind of person. For what her role in the movie was, it was serviceable, and I do understand, like, in a way, the scene that got the most emotion out of her is towards the end when she's, like, forced to send Grace onto the ship. Like, you get the impression that she doesn't actually want to force him to do this, but she feels like she has to, and so does everyone else who's, like, involved in that scene. You get the same impression from them, too. But she's a very stoic character, I guess. So it's hard to get a read on her emotions sometimes, on what she's thinking, maybe. So,
yeah. No,
aside from her orders.
That's a really interesting opinion because this was one of those characters I thought a lot about when I read the book, partially because she pissed me off.
Oh, really?
Because you get, I think, a much more callous character in the books, and so you get so this aspect that you got with her was almost better, in my opinion, in the movie than it was in the book. Because in the movie, you get more of a, she's down to business, but she's kind of got this grandmotherly type of feel, and that's part of because of how she dresses, and then also part of how she interacts with Grace. In the book, she's a lot more no nonsense. This is the way things are, and she does a few things that you get revealed in the book that you don't get in the film because it didn't make sense and lack of time and things like that. But she does things like she realizes that in order to keep the Earth warm for longer, they need to increase the amount of heat on Earth. And so one of the things that she makes an executive decision to do is she ends up nuking the polar ice caps, which leads to some level of nuclear fallout, but it keeps the Earth warmer for a longer period of time. And this helps to elongate overall life population on Earth while they're waiting for Grace to get back to them with a solution. So there's a couple things like that give you the impression that she is just hard-nosed, down to business. She's not here to mess around. She's here to save the world, and she's going to use any means necessary to do so. And the reason it pissed me off was because you get the impression that the way they present the character is this is someone you're supposed to care about. But to put it lightly, I thought, you're a jerk. You are a POS. I don't care about you. I think that you are a nasty character. And the fact that I should care about you only pisses me off more because I don't. I don't think you are making nice decisions, right decisions. You are just here to, do your business by any means necessary. And the utilitarian path was the wrong path in some of these situations. So I think that her character was, in regards to the twist, actually made it a little bit better because she seems like a very nice overall character, even though she's a bit standoffish until that moment where she goes, nope, you're going on this mission. You have no choice. I'm forcing you to. And then she pushes him forward into this mission of the Project Hail Mary. So I kind of liked it. I actually liked her a lot more. So it's interesting to get your perspective that she's still so cold and callous from your perspective that you
I would
found
say
her hard
callous.
to relate
Callous is
to.
not a word I would have used for her, but I would have said more stoic. Because I mean, with stoic, like you're just hiding your emotions, but you can still care about others. Whereas callous
Mm-hmm.
indicates you don't care about others, and you're just going to do whatever you think is like. It's like you don't feel any emotions more or less towards others while you like force like harsh realities on them.
Right.
But that's not the impression I got from her character or anyone else who's working on the same project with her on it. So I would say she's stoic. So that's why I said stoic and not callous. So I think maybe a little better than what the impression is in the book still, but
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that's what I got from her. At the end of the film, you get this impression that he's about to return to Earth. He got the astrophage from Rocky and he's on his trajectory. He's going to be there in 4 years. And then he wakes up and realizes the problem with the Xenonite adapting, or the Taumoeba adapting to the Xenonite capsules that it's trapped in, and it escapes and it's starting to eat the astrophage, which is the fuel to get back to Earth. And it's also what Rocky uses to get back to his planet. I think it's Arid is the name of his planet. What were your thoughts on that final decision that Grace has to make where he goes to save Rocky instead of going back home like he had always planned?
I really like that scene only because it is a dilemma scene in a way because Rocky didn't want to be in space to begin with, and he even though when he wakes up in space, he's like he didn't actually want to be here alone in space, and he resigns himself to dying in space. He's actually emotionally like grateful when Rocky suggests I can give you astrophage to get you back to Earth. Like that he is legitimately like because that's what he wants. And he actually gets that now. Now he can actually go back to Earth and he's all happy about that. Then he discovers the Taumoeba is eating the astrophage and he realizes, and even though he contains it, he realizes now he has to make a choice because Rocky probably doesn't know this. Rocky can't stop it. So Rocky's going to be stranded in space and Arid is probably going to die from the astrophage. And suddenly he has to make that choice. Like, do I keep going back to Earth like I wanted? Or do I abort my like goal, my desire, and go help Rocky and help make sure he gets back to his planet, even though it means I won't be able to go back to my planet. So, and
Yeah.
and so when you see that's the conflict, and he makes the choice, like the moral choice, like I'm gonna go help Rocky because he helped me out, he's rescued me, and he sees him as a friend now. So he deploys the drones as before, like as the original plan, and he goes to save Rocky. And so and it just shows his change of character in a way where it's like he has changed over the course of this mission to being like less cowardly and less self-serving and like more willing to step up. So,
Yeah. Do you think that's the theme of this film?
I would say it's one of the themes of the movie where it's like his change from cowardice to courage to being brave is one of those themes that run throughout this movie. And the friendship aspect of Rocky and just like the crossing of cultures and finding friends in unlikely places, just overcoming the boundaries, like those kind of things, I think are relevant themes that shape the movie and move it forward. In a way, and that's why I brought up Arrival earlier in the movie because like those same themes are kind of present in Arrival as well. The problem is this Arrival, the aliens don't really speak except in their weird, distorted way, and it's very confusing how they talk. And a lot of that movie kind of makes a semblance of sense by the end. It's not like you feel any emotional like connection to the aliens by the end of the movie in Arrival. That's why I just kept thinking, but with this movie, you do feel an emotional connection to Rocky and the Iridians in a way. So it's like it does the same thing but better in this one. Is why.
Yeah, I think definitely you have some level of emotional reaction to Rocky compared to those aliens. So for sure, I would say as a one-to-one, the interactions are better for sure. The themes are definitely that the theme of inter, more or less crossing cultural boundaries and accepting people where they're at and for who they are and working with them to achieve a common interest definitely present in the film and relevant, and those are probably developed more so than the one I initially asked you about, which is this idea of sacrifice. And I think some of that comes to that revelation coming so late in the film, just because you get, even though you realize that this isn't actually what he'd even be willing to do, even though he materially does change as a person, it's, in my opinion, it's so late in the film that they don't have a lot of time to develop it, especially because there's not really an acknowledgement of that initial frustration and unwillingness to go on the ship by the main character at all later in the film. And so I think that theme specifically is less developed, but it's present. So I and maybe this is where I'll come back to the themes again at the very end, but I think that this is one of the reasons I don't personally think that this film is going to be remembered for very long.
That's your opinion.
I see this might be a point where we just agree to disagree. What are your thoughts on how the film ended then? You get this idea that he ends up going with Rocky to his home planet, and he ends the film. They're teaching a new set of students, but they're all Iridians who are learning about science from their new teacher of Ryland Grace.
Yes. I think it was poetic and in a way, it's almost the way it ends is almost the way it begins, where it's like, I mean, it's not where he wakes up on the spaceship. The first scene you get of him in flashbacks is him teaching a class on Earth. So in a way, like the very earliest point in the movie mirrors the very last point in the movie, where it's like you see him teaching aliens on Earth, on Iridian, Arid. There is this floated the idea that they might fix the Hail Mary and let him get to go back to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But you also get the impression that Grace may decide he doesn't care if they finish it sooner or later. He's willing to wait it out. He is willing to, spend time on Arid.
Yeah. So. And that's one of the few changes from the book, where at the end of the book, it's very clear he's staying with the Iridians, versus in the movie, it's pretty much, oh, well, he could go back. We don't know. And they leave it as a question mark. I didn't really have a problem with that. It's fine to leave it up to whatever he wanted to do. But the point was that he found a new home, if you will, with these alien creatures rather than back on Earth like he had originally planned. So it's still poetic in regards to coming back to his home, a changed man, right? The classic hero's journey arc that we've seen hundreds of times. So it's not bad. I thought it was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. But this comes to the lasting impact of the film. Do you think this film was going to have a lasting impact?
I want to say yes, but I'm not sure if that's my love of the movie coming through or what. I mean, the real question is will this book last? Is the real question. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's based on a book. Because obviously, in the case like this, where it's like if it's based on a book series, if the book is around a decade from now, and the movie's a faithful adaptation of the book, that's going to stick around for, I'd say it's reasonable to assume the movie will stick around for just as long. I mean, I just think about good adaptations, movie adaptations of certain books, perhaps, and I almost think that the longer lasting movie adaptations of books are based on books that have lasted for decades, I guess, is what I'm thinking. So, I mean, I don't forget when Project Hail Mary came out as a book. I forget when it was published. But, I mean, we're still talking about it as a book. We're still reading it as a book. So, I mean, it's still being considered, in literary circles. So, I mean, there's a part of me that says, based on that, I would say, yes, it does. The movie does have a chance to survive longer than most. I would definitely expect it to last longer than some of the other, slot movies that come out every year. So, I mean, I think it will at least have some staying power. I don't know, will it last as long as, say, Lord of the Rings or something? I don't know about that. But
Yeah, I mean it's probably going to
So
last longer than the Marvels does in the cultural zeitgeist. I'll
yes.
grant that for
So,
sure. I think I mean so the book came out in 2021, right? The so this film came out about 5 years later, so not a huge time gap between when the book came out and when the film came out. But I think there's a lot of reasons why this got adapted so quickly. I mean, for one, the creator of the book already created a successful previous book that had been made into a movie of the same genre, The Martian. So there's no surprise that he was looked at as a potential candidate for new content. The aspect that he was also directly involved as one of the producers of this film means that he had a lot of say into its adaptation, and it was very accurate to the story he was trying to tell initially. So there's a lot of reasons why it ended up being the way it was, right? And there's I would say overall it's very accurate, it's very fair. I think that it depends on the stance that you take. I think if my initial stance that this is our modern version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is correct, maybe it does last for decades or for even centuries like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea has. Am I committed to that? No. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think that this film is primarily one, for starters, going back to the themes we were just discussing, I think that the themes are not, especially in regards to sacrifice, are not super well developed, especially with the way the flashbacks were designed. So I don't think those come across as compellingly. Obviously, there's some disagreement there. In regards to the mystery that which I was talking about earlier, right? I think that this film is primarily driven by mystery of not knowing what's going to occur. And then as you see it occur, all those question marks end up being checked, which I think leads to a very enjoyable first watch. What I wonder is, well, now that you know where all this is going, is there any question in your mind as to the enjoyability of it on a second run? Because all of those check marks are already answered. And so you're going to not have the same gripping element to it, maybe. I don't know. And I just feel like my gut reaction is that it's not going to have the same draw that other films do that have a lot of really tense interactions in the scenes where you feel a very palpable fear from the characters themselves, not just a question mark of what's going on. I think you get that, for example, in a lot of scenes. One of the audience asked about Interstellar. There's a lot of very palpable scenes of fear in that, as you see, for example, the wave coming to crash down and kill them, or you see him trying to go through the wormhole, right? Things like that lead to a very tense scene. Even though you've seen it before and you might know what's going to happen, you still feel that very tangibly. And I think that a lot of that probably would be lost in a rewatch of this film, other than that initial film, that scene where they're fishing. I think that scene will still stand the test of time and will be very enjoyable to rewatch. But I wouldn't rewatch a whole film just for that scene. Am I wrong? I could be wrong. Do I think I'm wrong? Obviously not. But I think that the mystery does beg a lot of question as to the viability on its rewatchable aspect.
Well, I would have to tell you after I rewatched it to know if it was actually
Sure.
the second time. Though I would also say that there are other movies like I mean that the whole like mystery thing. Like I mean, the reality is once you've seen the movie the first time, you know what's going to happen. So I mean, even
Mm-hmm.
then, it just depends. Like there are movies that even second, third, fourth times watching it, you know exactly what's going to happen, but it still maintains the same
Yeah,
tenseness or same
100%.
draw. Um, and even then, like there are some movies where it's like you don't watch it for, I would argue, you don't watch it for the action or the intensity of the conflict. You watch it because of the characters and what they bring to the story, their interactions. You go, there are definitely certain movies I think that have stood the test of time that they're not necessarily like, well, what would be a good example of this? Uh, I'm just thinking of like something that's more character driven, like a book or a
Mm-hmm.
story that's more character driven. That I mean, what's coming first to mind though is more like romance related adjacent
Mm-hmm.
things. But it's just like because the story is mostly about the characters and the conflict between characters per se, as opposed to the action and the intensity and conflict per se of certain scenes. Um,
Sure. And in regards
so
to that, it's a cozy film. Yeah, I'd
yes,
acknowledge that.
so and I think there is a draw and a space for that. And I think people do. There are people who want that kind of story, and we can rewatch that kind of story. So I know that you keep bringing Interstellar up. You brought Interstellar up once in relation to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And while I see why, I don't actually agree that they're the same story in a certain way, because
No,
in one
and
case,
to be clear, I wasn't actually trying to say they're the same story. I
Yeah.
was simply pointing out as a comparison of scenes that I think are more rewatchable. I mean, the scene where you see I forget the main character's name, but Matthew McConaughey's character in Interstellar, when
Yeah.
he's looking through the bookshelves at his daughter and he's losing his mind, right? That is a scene that people will call back to all the time because it's so iconic in regards to just like the tension wrought in that scene, right?
Mhm.
And I think that there's something to be said for creating a scene with that much gripping intensity to it compared to other films. And I think that because maybe I don't want to go there. Never mind. I'm not going to say that, but yeah. So I think just as a comparison of that specifically, I think Interstellar does that better. In regards to the like, are they the same?
Well, the
I mean, I guess they're
relationships-
both trying to save Earth, right?
Yeah.
And then, but in
Go
a
into
lot
space
of
to
ways,
save Earth, but it's not the
Yeah.
same. Like,
I would say they're fundamentally different stories, right? They're not
Yes.
trying to tell the same story, and you see that from the very cadence of the story. The one's meant to be a lot more humorous, whereas the other one's meant to be a lot more serious. And this
one
one
I would
actually
say is about-
downplays the scientific aspect of it compared to the book, versus Interstellar delves a lot more deeply into the scientific aspect of it because it's trying to deal with this mind-bending idea of time and how it interacts as you go to different planets and things like that.
Yeah. I would also add that Interstellar, the main draw of it is the family, like the daughter and father relationship, which is like a family relationship. The relationship between Rocky and Grace is one more friendship at best, not, I would say, necessarily family. It's a different kind of relationship. So you're not going to get inherently the same story because it's a different kind of relationship. It's not the same thing in
At
terms of
best,
appeal.
They're not friends.
Well,
They
they're
might not be friends.
They're friends. I was just kidding.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
So,
Yeah, there you go.
Other than that, I would just say that, I mean, but yeah, the stories are different. And as far as like the tension, like you do get scenes of, like, I would say the scene where Rocky looks like he might be dead in the scene evokes like some kind of tension and emotional response as well. Because like he died more or less to save Grace. And so like, and you as the audience don't know if he's dead or not. You don't know what the outcome of this whole situation is in that moment. So, I mean, that's the comparison I would have made, but
yeah, and that scene is a better one in regards to all the scenes in the movie. So I will grant that. Do you, out of curiosity, would you read the book now that you've watched the movie? Do you think that you would be intrigued to read it, or do you think that it answers a lot of the questions and it's not maybe as interesting as it would have been previously?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I think initially I was going to say yes, I would read it immediately, but you also like dumped down on a few aspects of the book that made me like question if this is one of the situations where the movie is better than the book because I enhanced certain scenes. And now I'm like, well, I don't know. So I'm now not as excited to read it, but I'm sure I'll probably read it eventually. So
yeah, well, I think this would be a situation similar to someone who's, say, watched one of the first seasons of Game of Thrones and then they try to read the books. I mean, they're so similar that you might go, oh, okay, I can't, like, these, why am I reading what I could just, watch? So I know that's my personal experience, but some people might still want to read the book. So, I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. I will give the obligatory plug for Red Rising. If you're going to read another book, just read Red Rising. Thank you, Andrew, for pointing that out. Red Rising's so good.
I think he was responding to Josiah Keeler's comment, but yes.
But yeah, in regards to Andrew's question about the Interstellar, and he says they're not the same. Why do you think Interstellar succeeds? While this movie, in his opinion, does not? Obviously, you think it does. So, but as a comparison, these are both space movies. They're both about saving Earth. They have similar premises, but they have different outcomes in regards to their goals, in regards to how the film ends. Do you think that one is more successful than the other? Do you think that there's should they even be compared?
Honestly, the more I think about it, I don't think they should be compared. And the only reason because the stories are just too different. I mean, the only thing they have share in common is they're both trying to save Earth. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and they go into space to do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one is like a community, like several people go into space and they're like trying to work together to save Earth. And the main character, Matthew McConaughey, is trying to get back to his daughter. Like that is
Mm-hmm.
the driving force, like saving Earth and getting back to Earth. And while you could say the same is true of Grace's character getting back to Earth, he's alone. He is like trying to survive in isolation and struggling with isolation being and he's trying to overcome his cowardice and his and just his own weakness on his
Mm-hmm.
own. So and on top of that, as you said, one has a very like more lighthearted style, whereas the other one is more of a darker, more serious tone. And I'd also add on top of that, as you said, one's more scientific, one's less scientific in some ways. And just calling it out, one has aliens in it, the other does not. I mean,
Sure.
there are like enough differences between them that I'm like, I don't know. I would not compare them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
besides like the basic premises, I would, as I said, I would compare Arrival more to this because there's more in common. I feel like thematically and conflict wise with Arrival than there is with Interstellar. But that's just my personal thing.
Sure, which is interesting just because the premise of Interstellar and of Project Hail Mary are actually more similar on paper than Arrival and Project Hail Mary are. But in regards to the actual playing out of the film, there's a lot more similar in Project Hail Mary and Arrival than in Interstellar and Project Hail Mary. So that's an interesting stance to take. I would generally lean toward the idea that they shouldn't be compared just because of how different they are in regards to their focuses. But if you were to say where I mean, clearly I'm a Christopher Nolan fan, right? That comes off right off the top of the head. No doubts there. In regards to why I would probably say Interstellar in my mind shines more than the other one is probably has to do with some of those things I mentioned previously. I think mystery survives probably one viewing. And so I don't know that it's going to survive beyond that. But even in that first viewing, did I not enjoy it as much? Yeah, I didn't. And the question is why? And I think some of that goes back to I don't think that it has the same intensity and gripping value to it in Project Hail Mary in comparison to Interstellar. So I think because of that, you get a lot more drawn in emotionally to the intensity of Interstellar in comparison to Project Hail Mary. But I also don't think Interstellar is meant to be a cozy film versus I think this one is supposed to feel a lot more cozy. So yeah, I mean, do you disagree? That's, leave it in the comments, but I think that's probably where most of our thoughts lie. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.